What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, retired, legendary, undefeated, former two-division world champion, former Olympic gold medalist, former pound-for-pound king, turned colorful analyst, Andre S.O.G. Ward, and his counterpart as a colorful analyst, former multi-division world champion, Hall of Famer, Timothy Desert Storm Bradley. They did a special to build up this Saturday's highly anticipated showdown between undefeated three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, and is widely considered the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Terence Bud Crawford, as he takes on former IBF welterweight world champion, British superstar boxer, Special K, Kell Brook. And in this, they talked about Terence Crawford's rivalry and his rival with undefeated, unified WBC IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer, Errol Spence Jr. And with that, Andre Ward and Timothy Bradley got into a serious, heated debate, in which, to my surprise, Timothy Bradley was going against Andre Ward because Andre Ward stated that he feels like Errol Spence cannot call himself or refer to himself as the big fish, as you know Errol Spence refers to himself, in the welterweight division, because he hasn't faced this man, Terence Crawford, as he pointed to the screen that Terence Crawford was on. He says, until you fight Terence Crawford, you can't consider yourself the big fish in the division. So Timothy Bradley says, well, Errol Spence wants that fight. He was alluding to Errol Spence wants to fight. And Andre Ward proceeds to say, somebody don't want this fight. The moment you bring up sides of the streets, somebody don't want the fight. He says, and you can't call yourself the big fish until you fight Errol Spence. And Timothy Bradley's eyes got this big, this wide. And he said, are you saying Errol Spence don't want the fight or is avoiding the fight? And he said, at the moment, Andre Ward responded, at the moment he don't. And Timothy Bradley said, man, come on, stop it, man. And it got heated. And he said, no, listen to me. Listen, I'm saying at the moment. And Timothy Bradley like, man, are you saying Errol Spence don't want this fight? He avoiding this fight, man? Stop it, man. And Timothy Bradley is 1,000% correct. And Andre Ward knows he's 1,000% incorrect. Because if that's the case, then Andre Ward has to refer and say that Terence Crawford, too, don't want the fight. Because they just did a special called Relentless on ESPN to build up this fight, in which Andre Ward asked Terence Crawford what would be his fight plan, his layout, before he steps away from the sport. And Terence Crawford said, my fight plan would be this, in order. After Kell Brook, I want to and I must fight 8-division world champion, legendary, iconic boxer, who's currently the WBA welterweight world champion, Filipino superstar, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. Then he said, after Pacquiao, I want Errol Spence. So it's clear that Terence Crawford is not eager to jump in the ring with Errol Spence either. He's not pushing for that fight to happen ASAP either. And then Andre Ward says another thing that confused me. He says, well, I'm not saying he don't want the big fights because, once again, he's fighting a fighter that's very dangerous and a serious opponent in 2-division world champion, former junior welterweight unified world champion, and former WBC welterweight world champion, Danny Swift Garcia, in his next fight. And that's a dangerous fight for Errol Spence Jr. Yeah, Danny Garcia is one of the best welterweights in the world, in which Terrence Bud Crawford referred to one of those 4 fighters as he named Manny Pacquiao 1, all in order, Errol Spence at 2, at number 3, Danny Garcia, and at number 4, former unified welterweight world champion superstar boxer Keith one-time Thurman. And then he said, I'm done. He didn't even make mention of 2-time welterweight world champion superstar boxer Showtime Sean Porter. But he made mention of Danny Garcia, and Danny Garcia has a fight coming up with Errol Spence. They're fighting each other. So after Pacquiao, he still wants to fight both guys. Somebody has to lose, Errol Spence or Danny Garcia, unless that fight ends in a draw. And even if it ends in a draw, right, more than likely they'll have a rematch. And if they don't have an immediate rematch, right, there's still unsettled business there. So he's stating that he wants to fight the winner. He wants to fight them in this order, regardless of the outcome of their fight, obviously. But he's saying he wants Pacquiao first before Errol Spence. And in another recent interview he stated that he wanted Manny Pacquiao first, so that way he could collect the WBA belt. And then it makes the fight with Errol Spence that much bigger, and it's for undisputed. So once again, you're saying, Andre Ward is saying that Errol Spence is doing the heavy lifting, fighting a better opposition. But in the same token, he's stating that Errol Spence don't want to fight with Terence Crawford. So he can't refer to himself as the big fish. But Terence Crawford just did a sit down with Andre Ward and told Andre Ward he himself don't even want to fight Errol Spence next because he has plans to fight Manny Pacquiao next. That's the fight he wants. So we condemn Errol Spence for saying that he has a 3-fight plan, and in his 3-fight plan is eerie similar to Terence Crawford's 3-fight plan when Errol Spence said that he wants to fight Danny Garcia, then Manny Pacquiao, then Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford is fighting Kell Brook, then Manny Pacquiao, then Errol Spence. So they essentially have the same layout and fight plan for their future. So how does it reflect that Errol Spence don't want to fight with Terence Crawford, so he can't refer to himself as the big fish? But again, he's fighting a better opposition at welterweight in the division that they're in, and he's unified with the WBC and IBF belt. And look who he beat to get unified. He beat Mikey Garcia, 4-division world champion, who was undefeated. Then he beat Showtime Sean Porter. And he beat the guy who Terence Crawford is getting ready to fight. He beat him 3 years ago, and he went across the pond to the UK when Kell Brook was still the IBF champion, and he stopped Kell Brook in the UK to get the belt. And now he's fighting Danny Garcia. So he's done the better work and the heavy lifting in the welterweight division, but he can't refer to himself as the big fish outside of Sean Porter, who has a better resume than Errol Spence. And oddly enough, he beat Sean Porter. So Sean Porter has the best resume, maybe in all of boxing, but Errol Spence beat Sean Porter. So he beat Sean Porter. He's on the verge of facing Danny Garcia December 5th. He beats Danny Garcia. He beats Sean Porter. He beats Kell Brook. And he beat Mikey Garcia, all with successful pay-per-views. He's not the big fish. Compared to Terence Crawford, resume, yes, Terence Crawford's skill set, yes, Terence Crawford's accomplishment, but prior to the welterweight division, astonishing. But at the welterweight division, when Errol Spence calls himself the big fish, he's correct. Terence Crawford resume at the welterweight division, no slight to his opponents, but he's fought Jeff Horn. Now, he beat Jeff Horn for the belt, who beat Pacquiao, all the credit in the world. But then he fought Jose Benavidez. Then he fought Amir Khan, who was far past it. Then he fought Igis Kavalouskis, who was his mandatory. Can't slight that. And Igis Kavalouskis is looking very, very good these days. So that win over Igis Kavaluskis is looking better and better every day. So salute to him for beating Igis Kavaluskis. But once again, Igis Kavaluskis is not on the level of Danny Garcia or Sean Porter. Jose Benavidez is not on the level of Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, or Kell Brook. Amir Khan refused to fight Kell Brook, and he's not on the level of Sean Porter, and we know he's not on the level of Danny Garcia because why? Danny Garcia knocked out Amir Khan already. So who has the better resume at welterweight currently right now and is unified? That would be one Errol Spence. So it only makes sense when he calls himself the big fish in the division. Because Keith Thurman just lost to Manny Pacquiao. Now, Manny Pacquiao trumps all. It's just that Manny Pacquiao is not of this era, right? And everybody assumes and feels like Manny Pacquiao fights Terence Crawford next, he's going to lose. And if Manny Pacquiao fights Errol Spence next, he's going to lose. He's 40-plus years old. So truly, and if you want to be technical, Manny Pacquiao is the big fish at the welterweight division. He's still that guy. And essentially, yes, Errol Spence is still looking to fight Manny Pacquiao. They're still chasing Manny Pacquiao because he still is the big fish. He just beat Keith Thurman, who was undefeated and unified, and at one point in time was considered the best welterweight in the world until injuries started to hinder him and inactivity, and he just became more and more irrelevant. So essentially, yeah, you could say Manny Pacquiao is the big fish in the welterweight division. But if he's to face Errol Spence or Terence Crawford, he's going to be the underdog in both those fights because they're just younger and hungrier. So with that said, Errol Spence earned the right to call himself the big fish in the welterweight division. And Andre Ward is very aware of this. Andre Ward knows this. Andre Ward right now has a close relationship with Terence Crawford, and it's showing. So drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notification. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shouts out to the entire LDBC. Shouts out to New Media. Shouts out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.